Minato vs. Obito, the night the legendary 4th Hokage and champion of Konoha faced the raging incarnate of hate, the Nine Tails, in a battle so arduous it would be named the longest night in Konoha. Even though such a battle was mentioned on the very first page of the manga, it wouldn't be until chapter 440 where Jiraiya's suspicions of another opponent battling Minato were brought to fruition, and who we know to be Obito. Then, in chapter 501, the battle finally begins, and though it's virtually 2 chapters as a whole, with so much build-up, people still manage to misinterpret not only Obito versus the Minato battle, but their scaling in relation as a whole. So, I wanted to discuss the idea of Minato versus the later versions of Obito to come along with a bit of a revisitation to the fight to correct many, misinterpretations about it and whatnot, but most importantly, why Minato versus Obito doesn't change very much throughout the series, and it's never really implied to. Firstly, we can begin with a section of the sequence of events of the Nine Tails attack to then relate them to Minato's more common and impressive showings later. Firstly, I want to begin with how upon Obito sliding through the highly classified barrier and killing the Anbu guards directly assigned to Hiruzen, Obito would then snatch Naruto up, killing Hiruzen's wife Biwako, where he would then threaten Minato to end the life of his child, where he would then toss him up in the air, and Minato would use Body Flicker as his opening move to blitz Obito. Though, Obito actually planned on this, and many people don't connect the dots as to why Obito actually placed the bombs on baby Naruto, which would be done because he was planning on Minato outspeeding him. Minato then leaves, saving Naruto, blowing up a house in the process, where Obito would then take Kushina to extract Kurama out, where she would still remain alive, and Minato would then fully blitz the complete Nine Tails to save Kushina, leading to the iconic panel of Minato saying, "I'll be right back." Minato then appears on top of his Hokage rock, and the full Nine Tails notices him, where he then proceeds to launch a massive Bijou bomb as fired at such impressive speed that its velocity alone was destroying the houses, where Minato would then use his specialty ninjutsu in the Flying Thunder God Guiding Thunder, cracking space and time to send the bomb directly through and far away, where it would still engulf the entire Hokage rock, though Minato would actually remark he needs to be more careful when redirecting his attacks, implying he was prepared to deal with more than one full Nine Tails Bijou bomb, which shouldn't really seem outrageous, seeing as, well, he could deal with the 10 Tails Bijou bombs as well, and upon transporting it away, Shukaku responds to Choza, furthering an earlier point of Minato implying he's the only one who can monitor the Nine Tails seal. He actually remarks about how impressive the space-time barrier was with "it's got to be Minato," implying that Hiruzen, who's implied to have extremely high level sealing after Minato's death, couldn't. Orochimaru, after seeing Jiraiya's changes to Naruto's seal, implies that his sealing is on the level of his and Old Man Hiruzen's, implying that such sealing capability stands at the peak of the world, like how Hiruzen's lore suggests for his overall combative prowess, through him being stated 3 times in the fan book to be the strongest Kage in the world, though Minato could stop Orochimaru when he likely couldn't. Then imagine Hiruzen with a much younger variant, where he would then possess less than half of the wrinkles in the Orochimaru fight and only one more than he did in his prime, which is actually a correction made by Viz to the original manga. And this is likely explaining why Hiruzen told his Anbu guards to leave and escort civilians, while he deals with the full Nine Tails alone. And while we don't really see how he pushes him out of the village in the manga, in the anime it's shown that he kind of just shoves him out with the, with Enma. However, the Naruto Storm games take it a bit further and show Hiruzen alone smacking him out of the village using Enma like a baseball bat. Now, this may seem tangential, but, continue here with me. The full Nine Tails is essentially just chakra, but in ridiculous quantities. With half of the tails of half of this Nine Tails, Naruto was able to push Pain, the potential strongest man in the Akatsuki, into using Chibaku Tensei, and more importantly, Naruto in the War Arc in the half Kurama avatar was shown slapping away 6 Bijou bombs and overpowering it, where he would then roar and push them back as well with the aid of his tails acting in a fan-like motion. However, in the Nine Tails attack, it all just blasts the buildings back with nothing else except his scream, also creating this shield of propulsion of sorts, which doesn't happen from the half Kurama avatar. But more importantly though, why would the Kurama avatar be any weaker? If anything, it's just chakra, but half of what the original Kurama had, and more chakra obviously means faster and stronger in the case of Kurama, seeing as there are implications that he actually is like potentially even as smart as Kakashi. And I mean, bro knows nuclear fusion off the top of his head. This would imply that a much younger Hiruzen who would scale above both the 3rd Kaze Kage and Raikage, who were the strongest Kage ever in their villages, was weaker than Minato and conceded the position of power despite being one of the most politically loved figures of all time, due to Minato's power and efforts from the Third War, which are supported in the 10-year anniversary guide stating that Minato scared shinobi from all the other villages, which would fit with how the 4th data book implied that he carried many weaker platoons of shinobi to victory, earning a run-on-sight order, meaning that Minato, at least whilst Hokage, could have a method of being above KCM2 Naruto through not only Hiruzen, but also him just blitzing the Nine Tails entirely. And when Hashirama tried to fight him, the styles of battle showed, considering he was actually bloodied up and his eye was gashed shut, whereas Minato could blitz the full thing and implied he had Nine Tails ceiling without the Reaper death, which would fit not only with how Minato was able to completely blitz all the original Hokage to the battlefield and even outspeed his own FTG in that time frame, where Tobirama, who can combo attack with base Hashirama, states that Minato has a faster body flicker and states that he also has a quick striking speed too, implying conjunction between the two speeds. And the original Hokage, including Minato, are actually called either the biggest of the big fish or the strongest soldiers as a unit, which would just be above KCM2 Naruto in the war, and Minato would be the fastest of all of them, likely adding credence to how Minato was compared to KCM2 Naruto by Kakashi. So Minato is clearly a KCM2 level threat, so I do also want to give Obito his credit as well, which shouldn't come to a surprise seeing as the entire narrative benchmark for Naruto was KCM2 as stated by Kurama, as that was the form that Minato intended for him to need to, master to battle the masked man who Minato already throttled. Their interaction picks right back up through Obito using a right hand tiger sign to relocate behind Minato, to where Minato then fully spins around and moves through his head, though likely slows his momentum seeing as he moves straight through the passive Kamui in his hands has already far exceeded the distance of his expectations, which could allude to how Obito caught his hand. But to give Obito his credit, and while yes, Minato was faster and escaped with, the Kamui suck, Obito does admit that he kind of just admits that he'll do it, faster next time, which wasn't really successful since Minato then just hypothesized several different ideas, like how Obito could be Madara behind the mask based on the accolades of what he accomplished on that night. However, Minato would still know what needs to be done, and that was for him to see, to give him a speed which Obito believed was consistent, boost his confidence whilst also testing if he's materialized when attacking, where Minato was then able to fully blitz or, fully react to and outspeed Obito's combat speed through the FTG whilst holding back, seeing as we know the FTG operates on a subspace to move through, and since Minato fully relocates and changes his body and even compresses his Rasengan, he was probably just holding back in the subspace and not moving at full speed, but was still too fast. And I can't really count this as too much, seeing as basically nobody else would have been able to react to it either. Minato then follows up with one of two things. The first was a stab to the stomach that resulted in the finishing blow, causing Obito's non-Zetsu arm to melt off. The second was a contract seal he then placed on Obito, which, yes, did go invisible within literally a few panels, so I wouldn't call Obito an idiot for not noticing the FTG mark, because it likely disappeared, though it was still active. So realistically, in a rematch, Minato would probably beat Obito much easier, seeing as he has the mark and Obito can't control Kurama. But yes, for our first match in Orange Mask Obito, I want to establish that he will be able to use Kurama, even though he stated not to be able to control him, likely due to the contract seal. And similarly, he also just won't have the FTG already placed. Both characters' incentives and initial knowledge will be the same, and this is where I think the fight then again kind of leans towards Minato. Also, quick little interlude, if you guys do enjoy my content, or if this is your first time seeing me and you do enjoy what you're hearing, then please consider subbing or watching more after this. Anyway, back to Orange Mask Obito. Now, even though he varies quite heavily in some areas compared to his younger 17-year-old self, he may be either slightly stronger or weaker depending on your interpretation of his arm falling off. The first interpretation would be that Obito gained more Zetsu/Hashirama cells prior to fighting Minato around his whole body, to the point where his arm was able to be melted off in such a fashion, and later he likely wouldn't have that amp, just the replacement for the original arm. The second interpretation placed directly off of that idea that his arm was fully replaced, meaning that what was lost was replaced with greater chakra, making Obito hence stronger. Either interpretation is fine. It's basically just a pick and choose, since we know that Obito, whilst in Orange Mask, is still implied to be a, KCM 1 to likely closer to KCM 2 level threat for Naruto to have to beat, through mastering the Nine Tails power. A power extraordinary in comparison to the power that took down Pain, which is still pretty impressive with how even the initial states of the Orange Mask era, he was still able to rival Itachi Uchiha in the novels just prior to him massacring the clan and gaining his MS, where Itachi would notice Obito in the Uchiha basement after realizing he was using Kamui to weave certain cameras, where they would then acknowledge it's been 4 years since the time that Obito murdered Tenma, Itachi's Genjutsu specialist teammate, who also was able to resist Obito's Genjutsu, from the Sharingan without one of his own, despite even the elite Anbu and Daimyo guards falling prey to it. However, after that, Obito would then kill Tenma in front of Itachi, and Itachi would be so frozen in fear by his aura alone that he couldn't even move, trying to just process the phenomenon of the man's body. However, 4 years later, he would cut straight through Obito's arrogant attitude, shocking Obito at his forcefulness, where Itachi would then declare he would kill Obito if he refuses the request to avoid both Konoha and Sasuke. The two men then acknowledged each other as opponents, and this would be extremely impressive, seeing as Itachi would be the same character who could, humiliate Orochimaru, the strongest Sannin, so bad through a 3-Tomoe Genjutsu and a hand slice that Orochimaru actually left the Akatsuki out of his sense of inferiority. And this same Orochimaru is stated to potentially be stronger than even Old Man Hiruzen, where the two would battle in a Hokage level magnitude, with the fan book claiming the two were evenly matched. Now, let's still neither forget or ignore the idea that Minato is implied by Hiruzen and Anko, the strongest kunoichi at the time and Orochimaru's disciple, to be somebody capable of beating Orochimaru even with his decade of training being accounted for, and potentially being overestimated, seeing as Hiruzen believes that all of his knowledge is no match for Orochimaru's talent. Yet Minato could have beat him, but he's just simply not there. Even Jiraiya, a character stated to be on par with Orochimaru in the data books and is compared to him numerous times to characters like Ebisu and Pain, also thinks that Minato was an unparalleled talent to such an extent that when he died, the chapter 238 synopsis statement would state that he has unrivaled strength, which would include Itachi, who doesn't even show a glimpse of his illness by this point. So Obito rivaling him certainly doesn't benefit him and actually helps Minato quite a bit. This shouldn't really come to a surprise. Minato is stated to be so powerful that only Naruto could ever hope to surpass him, meaning not Pain, not Itachi, not Jiraiya, not Oniki, or even Raikage A could ever surpass him, which is an idea that A doesn't even seem to disagree with him stating that no shinobi alive is faster than him since the 4th Hokage died, even after Obito phased through his punch, showing just how fast Hokage Minato truly is. And while some people, still believe that A is equals or faster than Minato, that's simply not the case, and the only evidence would be through sources citing Jonin Minato, the Yellow Flash, not Hokage Minato. The 4 databook states in reference to V2A to be able to keep up with KCM 1 and boast a godlike speed not inferior to the Yellow Flash. However, Minato's databook description states that even among the elites of the other nations, he was praised among all ninja as the greatest in godlike speed. This argument not only forces a distinction between Jonin Minato and Hokage Minato, but also Hokage Minato and V2A, which gets supported in the chapter 543 synopsis statement stating that the 4th is even faster than Raikage. So, even Obito outspeeding V2A, if you want to call it that, it was just his passive Kamui, isn't really a feat, and Minato would still be above that, leaving us with one idea: that Obito is still of a caliber capable of holding back on weaker Akatsuki members like Konan to beat her, and is still implied to be closer or superior to Pain and Itachi, in power being much closer to like KCM 1 to, KCM 2 speeds, as we implied earlier, leaving us with, nothing. He lost the change, so even him catching Minato in this won't work, and neither will Genjutsu, seen as, yes, he could control Yagura, a perfect Jinchuriki, for years on end. He never Genjutsu'd Minato initially, and Minato Minato stared directly into his soul the entire battle, likely implying that Obito either can't use genjutsu while controlling Kurama, or Minato potentially just has some ridiculous genjutsu resistance, leading us to the same conclusion we had before. The strategies will be the same, but potentially worse for Obito since he lacks the chains, and the speed disparity is roughly the same. Obito's durability hasn't really increased through any measurable way. His only durability feat is blocking Suigetsu's sword strike with just his forearm. However, such a sword strike was so inferior to the version 1 unserious Raikage that Suigetsu's arm was going to get literally ripped off. So no, Obito's durability isn't going to be tanking Rasengans this time around. And yeah, moving on to our last main masked form of Obito before getting to the 10 Tails level characters later that we probably won't talk about. We have the one that's likely actually going to give Minato a real run for his money, where his strategies will have to be changed in a much more competitive manner. And while Minato has KCM2 level scaling and whatnot, whether that be from his narrative scaling to Obito, his scaling above young Hiruzen, his scaling to Kakashi, in the late war, or Kashi's, visualization or whatever you want to call it, his scaling above, the 4 Hokage, you name it. Obito, at least in this form, does as well. However, unlike the last matches, in a much more direct way, seen as they do fight each other in the war. Firstly, I want to briefly analyze the power increase Obito actually got from gaining the rinnegan, and the two largest pieces always brought to the table for this idea is how the weekly release statement says he's getting closer to perfection, and the later one states that his ocular power nearly drove him mad. However, while I think Obito definitely did get an amp, it's nothing to place him in a higher tier to then debunk the claims of Orange Mask or Yellow Mask Obito scaling to KCM2. Him growing closer to perfection likely is in reference to him getting closer to the Sage of Six Paths, or the true form of his goal, being the 10 Tails Jinchuriki, since the Rinnegan is, at this point in the series, a thing, like a direct thing from the Sage of Six Paths, so it's just going to be giving him some small amounts of chakra to amplify himself, but more importantly, he's getting more similar to his later counterparts, and more importantly, the Sage of Six Paths. Him nearly going mad is pretty crazy, but it's also just likely due to how he was having to suppress the eye's, ocular chakra, like how Kakashi would try to do with the Sharingan, since those weren't native to their ocular nerves. Another thing that could also display the narrative of the amp being present but not necessarily large would be how when Madara gets the amp, he also gets Hashirama cells as a bonus, where Obito already had a ridiculous amount of them, so the amp might not be so large, and some of that power amp from Madara could have been from the Hashirama cells, which would fit very consistently with Obito's performance against Naruto and his KCM2 clones. Both combatants were able to battle and react to each other consistently. The first main reaction would just be Naruto thinking back to Minato's words of him needing KCM2, where Kurama would then speak to the others that this is the form Naruto needed to beat Obito, as intended by Minato, where Obito recognizes the power, and when Naruto draws his chakra hand back, Obito can mentally notice the movement and move some point too when it hit the ground, just not fully evade the attack. But since he knew he would phase anyway, he may not have just been moving at his peak speed or whatever, or the other interpretation would just fall along the lines that like he was combatively reacting, but the coverage of the hand was too much to fully evade it. And I think both interpretations work together, and that's probably what I would argue. Obito then fires out his large Kamui Shuriken, displaying his much more, common strategies. Now he has the White Mask. However, Naruto didn't really need to react to the size up Shuriken, seeing as Yuki caught 2 of them before the third one cut a tentacle, and Naruto just using one hand used the avatar mouth to catch it. And these Shuriken are really impressive, seeing as they can move alongside Madara's Susanoo projectile attacks equally, like with the respective fire style jutsu they used on Naruto, who, whilst protecting the entire alliance, giving them chakra, was reacting to not only these high-level ninjutsu attacks, but also Obito's surprise attacks from even behind, moving a similar distance to them. This happening in KCM 1.5, which is essentially KCM 1, but following him already attaining KCM2, so the link is kind of better. So it's kind of just like a lower form of the KCM2 and like a lower form of the cloak, which can still move relatively to EMS Sasuke later. However, it's still able to react to this Rinnegan Obito, potentially hinting at Obito being slightly below KCM2 in sheer speed, yet holding an advantage due to Kamui, which aligns with the previous feat as well, along with the others in their interaction, like when Naruto reacted to his Biju rods with a clone and then weaved through the same rods, nearly hitting him with a Rasengan. And while he did use the Biju rod out of Kamui to quickly smash the rock in front of him, Naruto's clone popped, which could have been on purpose since the real strategy was the Bijou Bomb which he fired at Obito, and Obito couldn't fully evade that either, implying again that he can react, but their size is of a greater difference than the speed disparity between the two. I also want to note that the Bijou Rod strategy is one he could also use on Minato, like the Shuriken and other large-scale fire styles to help him make up for the loss of the chains. However, since it would only really be Minato's bodily speed, he's likely really close to this Obito in speed, unless you, again, believe that Obito was just below Naruto and was only aided due to Kamui, which is possible. And in terms of actual combat speed though, Minato is certainly able to keep up with him, and especially through the later portions of the war where Minato's still weaker in Edo, and he's actually able to keep up with Raikiri, Kakashi, and they are actually called persistent in their attack against Zetsu Obito, which would likely imply the two are relative in their assault, and as their combo attacks wouldn't really work otherwise. Kakashi, much before that, was fully shown scrapping with Obito in hand-to-hand combat, where he even potentially gets the edge, yet holds back because of their old relationship. And well, many people don't like this, but before getting chakra and walls drained, he was already reacting to Obito through things like mud walls, and when Obito then states he had to remove it, remove the seal on his heart, it's implied that he couldn't have done it on his own, which if anything would imply that Obito engaged Kakashi knowing that he would be somebody capable of pushing him to the point where his seal would be removed. The only time Obito really used the absorption ability was literally to remove Kakashi's chakra cloak due to Obito likely not wanting to face Kakashi in combat with it on, meaning that in terms of combat speed, Minato is verifiably very close to Kakashi through this method, which would again just be another example of him being able to scale to like a KCM2 level threat whilst Hokage like with Obito, as he could battle him. So here's how I'd see the fight playing out. Firstly, the combat speed would be competitive. However, Minato seems to have much more consistent lines to KCM2 Naruto than Obito does. However, it's not like Obito can't react. Minato's best asset is still its FTG, which allows him to regulate the battle based on the ability to think. If Obito, for example, using one of the Bijou rods were to come out of Kamui, Minato then just has to think and relocate somewhere else. And this means that there likely isn't anything in Obito's arsenal that could catch Minato lacking without serious amounts of pressure, since we know that the FTG is a transportation technique described as flight across space and time, and being closer to summoning than body flicker in the sheer difference of speed. And this is all from the second data book, which also pushes a narrative that it has a speed equation, which lines up with how he never calls it teleport, but rather transport through the entire Obito fight. And Tobirama, the creator, notes his clone's FTG is too slow. So I'm sure some might be asking, if it has speed and movement, then how does it work? And well, the third data book has a dictionary section in the back to further explain certain concepts, and for teleportation ninjutsu, it's implied to be something beyond the concepts of space and distance, where you then you're then transported, I guess, into a subspace made through the technique. So it's basically a shortcut. An analogy I always use is think of two dots on opposing ends of a piece of paper. Instead of fully traveling that distance from one dot to another, Minato can fold the paper and travel the closer distance between the two dots that way. And since we know this is also how Minato can reappear in different positions from, when he went in, meaning, that, there has to be a space that he's able to move himself around, and that's best shown against Obito, where he then re-angles and seemingly compresses the Rasengan and rotate a full 90 degrees to then slam the Rasengan, which would mean he could also just, move his Rasengan and arms and basically combative elements in a space where the level is of a speed that's not even comparable to body flicker, as stated in the second data book, which obviously can outspeed Obito. I mean, it's body flicker. I won't get into his crazier reaction feats, like reacting to the fifth step 8 gates guy or whatever, because debunking the debunks to that feat seem somewhat tangential. So the point is, Minato is probably still faster than Obito, or of a great enough speed to be able to capitalize on these situations as if he was, due to FTG. So while I could see some really high level things like the bomb blast dance, which moved a further distance to Madara's majestic destroyer flame coming out, they are merely just pressure against Minato. But this could just be like if Minato can't close the distance. That's kind of what they're going to be helpful for. And yes, he obviously could with speed, but he won't, since he was too cautious to test the Kamui until they ran again. So if Obito can just use these larger ninjutsu to keep him back and avoid Minato from getting the answer to his hypothesis, I could see a pretty good case for Obito doing massively better than he did in his yellow mask. And it also helps that he's somewhat faster now. The large scale shuriken that he pulls from the Kamui would also just give him good pressure to keep him back, seeing as their range is pretty pretty impressive. However, if Obito does make the choice on, engaging him in a much closer sort of combat setting, then Minato has a chance to then figure out his speed and materialization and then place a mark. However, Obito also just has like the Uchiha reflection blade, which allows him to basically reflect anything, Minato has, including like Rasengans that's even mentioned to battle both Biju and Jinchuriki alike. And while this would be pretty effective, Minato mostly fights with kunai anyway, so his wood release might just be much more effective than that, and it's unknown as to why Yellow Mask Obito didn't use it, but White Mask Obito does use the wood release to destroy Naruto briefly, which could still imply that he has access to the wood release cutting technique. And yes, this could have been a jutsu that he only was able to use since he had Zetsu, and the only other listed user is the Ten Tails, and Zetsu kind of comes from that in a sense, meaning he couldn't use it without Zetsu. But to give him the benefit of the doubt, since, saying he could means like quite a bit, since this is by far the best pressure he has, or at least it's way better than anything that Minato has, since the data book makes several remarks like how it's the highest level of all blood-shedding wood release jutsu, and that if used effectively could even gain control and manipulate other branches in the area, and the field of marked kunai Minato relocates to is surrounded by these trees, so this will definitely force Minato to be zipping around with the FTG basically the whole fight until the window is open, where he would then just eventually slash his throat. And for those who believe Minato can only use FTG a couple of times, I want to emphasize that when Minato beats the Iwa platoon, he has 70 marked kunai that he presuming he's going to teleport to which doesn't really contradict anything. So yeah, while I would say the fight is extremely close, I could actually just lean either way. I might lean towards Minato, call me biased or whatever, but the ways are there, and that's exactly what I wanted to set out and prove, that what Minato did wasn't something to dunk on, because Obito was younger, but he actually might have just beat the other versions as well, showing just how crazy Hokage Minato really was the night of the Nine Tails attack, and well, Obito as well. I really wanted to make a video going over the fight in a more you misread X fight type of video, but Six has already done that on this one, so credit to him. But let me know if you guys would like to see me cover it along with many other topics that you would like. But more importantly, what do you guys think about the video? Do you guys agree, disagree? Either way, make sure to let me know, and as always, have a great day. God bless and love you guys.